So yes. So this is a chapter we are going to discuss now, and the name of the chapter is atoms. Any idea about what is the chapter number? So it is chapter 1. Well, you just give me a minute. So you have to see whatever I'm writing here. Yes. So in chapter 12, these are all the topics that we are going to discuss. One is the introduction. Just give me a minute. Yes. So one is the introduction that we are going to see. So in the introduction, we will see what are the different types of atoms or models that were proposed. Secondly, for every model that was proposed, there were certain drawbacks due to which the next scientists who came, they took the drawbacks into consideration and they started explaining what all things could have been better with respect to the model already proposed, right? So there is a concept which you already know. What are all the different models of atoms that you already know? So starting with Dalton's atomic model, then you have Thomson's atomic model, something called as a plum pudding model or watermelon structure, something like that. So there were some drawbacks in Thomson's model, and it was rectified by whom? Who is the one between Bohr and Thomson? Right. So he came up with an experiment of alpha ray scattering. So from there, the different model of atom came into picture. After that, what happened? Then there were certain drawbacks that were observed in that model of an atom. Then Bohr came and he explained, and that is what we are following today. Right. So introduction, and we are going to see what is the alpha ray scattering and Rutherford's nuclear model of atom. Then we'll see what is atomic spectra. Then we'll speak about what is the Bohr's model of hydrogen atom. Then we'll speak about the line spectrum of hydrogen atom. And this is de Broglie. We pronounce it as de Broglie, right? It is actually de Broglie. DE-BROY. That is how it is pronounced. So de Broglie's explanation of Bohr's second postulate of quantization. So if you see, this chapter has two things. That is, one is theoretical part, and the second is a mathematical expression that we are going to deal with. So in the theoretical part, we are only going to see the model of the atoms that were proposed and the drawbacks that were there in it. And in the derivation part, it comes only under the Bohr's model of atom. Okay, which involves very, very simple physics, which is easily understandable, and you can do it. Okay, even if it is subjective, the questions you can expect will be on the derivations. So shall we get started? Right. So as I told you, concentrate more on the content and don't worry about taking down the notes. Okay. So first, one thing that was observed is, if you take at atmospheric pressure, right? How much is the value of atmospheric pressure? 1.01 into 10 power 5 Newton per meter square. At atmospheric pressure, what happened? You have air and other gases, and all those gases were observed to be what? They were core conductors of electricity. So when can you say something can conduct? When can you speak about the conduction? Especially when you talk about the electric current. You need free electrons, right? When you talk about the air and the gas molecules, other gas molecules that were observed under normal atmospheric pressure, what do you think would have happened? There would have been no free electrons possible, right? Due to which they behaved like they exhibited the qualities of a core conductor, right? So the quality of core conductors of electricity. So because they do not have any free charge particles. But the question is, can you make them good conductors? The next question is, okay, you're saying that air and gas molecules were observed to be bad conductors of electricity, but to make them good conductors of electricity, what were the techniques that were followed? So it was observed that when you pass electric current, okay, electric current may be passed through a gas by some mechanism. How can you do that? One is by applying a large potential difference across the gas column at very low pressure. If you do this, then what you can do is you can start generating the free charge particles. Or the second method is by allowing the X-rays to pass through the gases. When you follow these kind of techniques, what will happen? The gases which exhibited poor qualities of conductor will become, they'll become good conductors because you have generated free charge particles. Right? But if you observe, atoms is what? Atoms is all about. So till now we don't know what is the structure of atom. We don't know what are these electrons and all those things, right? So nucleus and all those things, or what is the electrostatic force that is holding and all those things at that point of time, right? But this is the observation that was done initially. So from here, what happened? The study of electric discharge through gases gives valuable information regarding the structure of atoms. So when this electric discharge process was started, that is when they started proposing the different structures of atoms that would have been possible, right? So this has led to the discovery of the concept of electrons by whom? By Thomson, by J.J. Thomson, and later on the discovery of X-rays by Roentgen. Okay, so this is the introduction. So from this, we are going to see what are the different models of atoms that were proposed, right? So first, as I told you, when you go back to 1803, Dalton was the first. So he was actually an English teacher, okay? So what did he propose? He proposed that atom is the smallest particle that is indivisible. So what do you mean by that? So atom does not consist any other subatomic particles. But in today's world, we know what? Atom consists of electrons, neutrons, and protons. But at that point of time, in 1803, when the first proposal was made, it was thought that atoms were indivisible. Means atoms are a single entity. That's it. So that is what they proposed, and he called it as atoms, right? Then what happened? Prout is another scientist in 1815 suggested that all elements are made up of atoms of hydrogen. So he started proposing that all atoms were made up of hydrogen. But what would have been the drawback? With the current knowledge that we have, what can you say? So if everything was made up of hydrogen, then what should have happened to the atomic weights of every element? They should have been exact multiple of that value, right? So they should have atomic mass. The atomic mass of hydrogen is some x units. Then the second element that is there, it should have exactly 2x units, and the third element should have had 3x units. But with the periodic table description, we know that this is not the pattern that is being followed. So this theory also has some drawback. It is not going to happen. So these were the proposals that were made, but we are not saying that they were right. We are only trying to dig the history and see. So since many of the elements were found to have atomic weights that were not exact multiples of the hydrogen, the suggestion was not accepted. This also failed. So later what happened after the discovery of radioactivity and electrons? So what do you mean by radioactivity? You have heard this word radioactivity? What is it? So radioactivity is basically the disintegration of an unstable nucleus. So if you have an unstable nucleus, I'm not talking about an unstable atom, try to understand. So what is the difference between both? When do you say an atom is unstable? Okay, uneven number of protons and electrons. That is when you charge that particular material. Okay. If you talk about a neutral atom, when will it be unstable? When the electrons are in the excited state. So what do you mean by unstable? Unstable is something which has greater amount of energy. When can it have energy? When the electrons are getting excited to some other state, right? Whereas when you talk about a nucleus, you can say that there is an unstable nucleus. If there is an unstable nucleus which is happening due to the nuclear forces between them, then it will get disintegrated into different parts, right? And it will try to give you some stable nuclei. That's what we are going to see in the next chapter. Okay. So that is the concept of radioactivity. So radioactivity, to put it in simple terms, what is it? It is the disintegration of unstable nucleus. So after the discovery of radioactivity and electron, interest in the atomic structure increased and many models of atoms were suggested at different times. So why we spoke about radioactivity is because we saw the alpha ray scattering experiment, right? What are alpha particles basically? We have discussed in magnetic effects of current also. Many questions were asked. Proton and alpha particle, they are projected into magnetic field. Okay, helium itself is an alpha particle. So helium 2 plus nucleus is what is called as an alpha particle. Helium 2 plus, what is the atomic number of helium? So He24, right? So atomic number is 2 and atomic mass is going to be 4, right? So if it is able to lose 2 electrons and it becomes He2 plus, at that point you call it as an alpha particle. It's a technical name, that's it. Okay, but helium 2 plus is what we call it as an alpha particle, right? So the first model of atom that came into the existence. See, sometimes we'll get this kind of notification. That point you tell me, okay, I'll not be able to see it here. So Thomson's atomic model. So what did he propose? From the study of, we saw in the introduction itself, what happened? The gases became good conductors of electricity under what concept? When you were able to subject those gases to large amount of potential difference. When you subjected them to large amount of potential difference, what happened? Then discharge takes place, right? So from the study of discharge of electricity through gases, it became clear, or they became clear with one point. What is it? That atoms consist of positive and negative charges. So we can call them as subatomic particles. So this is where Dalton's theory is ruled out. Okay. So this was the first discovery at that point. It consists of positive and negative charges. Okay. So when we know this logic, when you have something called as positive and you have something called as negative, you should always give an explanation which accounts the stability of an atom. So just now I told you one point. What is it? When can something be unstable? When it has more amount of energy. They can either be in the excited state, or what you told is also right. Electrons can be lost or electrons can be gained. When there is an unbalance taking place, that point it will happen. So when they are saying an atom consists of positive and negative charges, what is the first logic that will come to our mind? So the first question we need to ask is atom a positively charged entity, negatively charged entity, or is it a neutral entity? According to the logic of stability, you think and tell me, what is that we will give? What is that you would have proposed? At that point, let's say you discovered something like this. It consists of positive and negative charge, you're 200% clear about it. But to account the stability of an atom, what would you propose? You will say it has equal number of positive and equal number of negative charges. You will not say either of them is dominating the other. Then it becomes unstable, right? So he came up with the conclusion, yes, it has equal number of positive and negative charges. If that is a scenario, then how should the structure of that atom be? So now they are clear with one point. What is it? Atom is divisible. It can be broken into positive and negative charges. If that is a scenario, then what should have been the structure of it? Structure means what should have been the shape of that atom? And with the knowledge they had at that point of time, they proposed something. Thomson proposed something like this. So Thomson tried to explain the arrangement of positive and negative charge inside the atom. Then how did he do it? According to him, what is it? An atom is a sphere of positive charge. The sphere is completely made of positive charge. And what about the electrons? The electrons were embedded in them in the shape of some seeds present in the watermelon. That's why they call it as watermelon model also. So according to him, an atom is a sphere of positive charge having the radius of approximately 10 power minus 10 meter, which is 1 angstrom. Okay, that's what he proposed. Right, these kind of important points only we can make a note. Don't write the whole theory. Like some important points are underlining, right? Those points you can write it down. So according to him, an atom is a sphere of positive charge having a radius of order of 10 power minus 10 meter or 1 angstrom. So what is the spelling of angstrom? So the positive charge, so what is happening? This positive charge is there, right? This positive charge is uniformly distributed over the entire sphere and electrons are embedded, they are not revolving. Somebody told me revolving. Revolving concept came only in Bohr's concept. Okay, he told that the electrons were embedded, they were placed at random positions, and the electrons are embedded in the sphere of that positive charge. I hope you are able to understand this, right? So how will it look like? Atom should be a sphere, and the sphere should be positively charged. This red color, I'll call it as positive charge. In this, what happened? There were electrons that were present like this. They were embedded in it. So this is how the basic structure of proposed by him would look like. In such a way that what should happen? For this atom to be stable, the total positive charge should be equal to the total negative charge. So the total positive charge inside the atom is equal to the total negative charge carried by the electron, so that every atom is electrically neutral. Never forget this point. Every atom is electrically neutral. Okay. Secondly, he told something like this. In general, he proposed that the electrons of an atom are located in a symmetrical pattern with respect to the center of the sphere. So this is another point that he told. What did he say? He told that electrons were not randomly spread out, rather they were distributed symmetrically with respect to which point? With respect to the center of that positively charged sphere. Am I clear with this? No doubts, right? Simple theory. Right. Now, so this was proposed. Okay, accepted. But the scientists later observed certain drawbacks. What were the drawbacks? First, according to the concept of electromagnetic wave, according to the concept of electromagnetic theory, you remember how are electromagnetic waves produced? I kept repeating one important point. If I ask you what is the source of an electric field, you will say source of an electric field is charge. Source of magnetic field is the same charge in motion. That is electric current. Are you able to understand the difference? So what is the source for electromagnetic wave? Time varying. Okay, time varying and electric and magnetic field is collectively called as an electromagnetic wave, but that is not the source. The source is charged particle only, but the charged particle should follow something. It should be put under some oscillation. If you talk about an accelerating charged particle, that is the source of an electromagnetic wave. Please make a note of this point, because everywhere this concept comes, electromagnetic theory. So what is the source of an electron? There is a one mark question which is often asked in CBSE exams. Okay. And in today's world, you know this fact. So you would have learned about emission spectrum and absorption spectrum. Yes or no? You would have heard these words at least. So what are they? So what do you mean by emission spectrum in the first place? You would have learned about Lyman series, Balmer series, Paschen, all these things, right? So what do you mean by spectral lines? If you have an electron in an excited state, and if the electron jumps from higher orbit to lower orbit, what will happen? If an electron jumps from, energy is released. When you're saying energy, energy is released in which form? Energy is released in the form of light. Okay, more rather than saying it as light, when you say light, right, people will understand it as visible light. Because infrared, ultraviolet, these things will not come under the concept of light, according to the basic understanding. So if you use the word, they are released in the form of electromagnetic waves. So what is happening? When an electron jumps from higher orbit to a lower orbit, energy is released in the form of electromagnetic waves. You remember this electromagnetic spectrum? In electromagnetic spectrum, you have ultraviolet rays, infrared rays, microwaves, visible light. All these things are there, no? So based on that only, the series is classified as Lyman, bracket, and all those things. So bracket series is the one which is the visible light region. Lyman series will be in the ultraviolet region. So all the electromagnetic waves released by them will be in that particular spectrum. Are you able to understand? So that is what they are trying to say in this point. Now read this, it will make more sense. So what are they saying? According to electromagnetic theory, the vibrating electron, vibrating means vibrating, oscillating, and accelerating. All the three means same. Because any particle in vibration will have acceleration towards the center because it is in simple harmonic motion. So according to electromagnetic theory, the vibrating electron should do what? The vibrating electron should radiate energy in the form of electromagnetic waves. Right? When you say electromagnetic waves, those waves have certain frequency associated with them. Right? So what will be the frequency of that electromagnetic wave that is coming out? So the frequency of the electromagnetic wave will be exactly equal to the frequency with which the particle is oscillating. Are you guys able to understand what I'm trying to say? So if you draw a block diagram, whenever this kind of theory comes, right, I'll tell you how to make notes. So don't read the whole story. Always put a block diagram. That is more easy for you. So what are they trying to say? According to electromagnetic theory, what will happen if you have a vibrating electron? What would be the result? You can see that energy is radiated, right? And this energy radiated will have a frequency equal to whom? Frequency equal to the vibrating electron. So whatever I'm writing here, you write it in your own words. According to electromagnetic theory, if you have a vibrating electron will radiate, and the radiated energy will have a frequency equal to the frequency of the electron. So this block diagram will help you understand in the last minute. Right? Is it clear? Is the first sentence clear? Right? You got a clarity of this, right? Remember this. This is the whole story which keeps repeating throughout the chapter. There is nothing outside this. Okay. So in the case of hydrogen atom, so when I say hydrogen atom, how many electrons are going to be there? H11. It has one electron only. But when they are saying the case of hydrogen atom, Thomson's model gives only one spectral line of how much? Of about 1300 angstrom. Sorry, not 300. It gives a wavelength of 1300 angstrom. Now try to understand this. So you are saying hydrogen atom has only one electron, right? But what does emission spectrum tell us? Electron has to jump from higher orbit to a lower orbit. Emission spectrum to higher to lower. Absorption is lower to higher. So for that, you need something. So in your physics, you will discuss only about emission spectrum, no absorption spectrum. Okay. So hydrogen has one electron, and they are using the word it is releasing a spectral line. How is it possible? So for this kind of a scenario to take place, what are we supposed to do to that electron in the first place? You need to first excite it and then de-excite it. So when you do that experiment, according to this theory, what should have happened? It gives explanation of saying that hydrogen atom can release only one spectral line. But how many spectral lines do we know in today's world? You know, 5. So this is one of the reasons why this theory failed. Okay. In board, that there's a possibility of only one spectral line, and that one spectral line will have a wavelength of 1300 angstrom. So, but the experimental observations reveal that hydrogen spectrum consists of 5 different series with several lines in each series. What is this? We'll see it in the post theory. That is more interesting. Okay, not well, this is a little bit of theory only. Till we go to the next experiment, the concentrator. So I'm assuming there is no doubt till here. Correct? Shall I proceed? Yes. So what is the second drawback that was observed? So obviously one thing it failed with respect to the Bohr's observation. That is the first point that you have mentioned. Secondly, so since this model was not accepted, the subsequent scientists would have found some drawback. So it could not account for what? It could not account for the scattering of alpha particles through large angles. So it didn't give an explanation. Why it didn't give an explanation? We'll see it there. Okay. So this is how it looks, guys. The yellow color part is a positively charged matter, and these electrons are embedded. Are we clear? Shall we proceed to the next part? Right. So the second part is about the Ernst Rutherford's alpha particle scattering experiment. Okay, I put it like this in experimental arrangement, observations and conclusions of Rutherford's alpha particle scattering experiment. Okay, so what was the thing that was observed here? Let's see. So Rutherford and his associates studied the scattering of the alpha particles. So the concept of alpha particles itself came into existence after discovery of what? After discovery of radioactivity. Because without radioactivity, you can't generate alpha particles, right? What did they use? They used a thin gold foil. Why did they use thin gold foil? Any idea? Gold is what? Is a metal or non-metal? So metal is going to be more malleable, right? So they use the word thin because gold could be converted into a thin foil by using its malleable property. What is malleable? It can be made into thin sheets. So that is the property of gold that was exploited at that point. So that point maybe it was not that costly. That is why they used gold. Maybe in today's world we would have used aluminum. So thin gold foil in order to investigate the structure of atom. Okay. So gold foil is a metal, and that would have also had atoms. Right. Now what was observed? So you know what is an alpha particle? An alpha particle is basically a positively charged particle having a mass equal to that of helium atom and positive charge in magnitude equal to twice the charge of an electron. To put it in simple terms, helium 2 plus. Helium 2 plus is what we call it as an alpha particle. So for that alpha particle, what is the mass? So mass is exactly equal to the same as that of helium atom itself. But what is the charge of it? It is 2e. Because it has lost 2 electrons. According to electrostatics, it should be 2e. Right? And how are they produced? That also I told you. They are emitted by many radioactive elements. Right? When I say radioactive element, it should be an unstable nucleus. So about the radioactive elements, we'll learn it in the next chapter. Don't worry too much. Okay. So scattering of alpha particles produces useful information about the structure of atom. Now, after which scientist was this experiment performed? After Thomson. So Thomson told it is a complete sphere. Atom is a complete sphere. But he disproved something. What is it? Let's see. So the experimental setup is going to look something like this. What did they do? You read the statement. A fine pencil. When they say fine pencil, means the alpha particles, whenever some disintegration takes place, whenever there is a blast, okay, is that blast going to scatter the particle only in one particular direction? Think about it. All directions, right? But what should you do? According to your requirement, you need to build a setup around it, a wall around it, in such a way that you need only particles in a particular direction. So what you will do, you will build a structure around it, and you will release the particles of whatever is your requirement, right? So that is what they're trying to say. A fine pencil of alpha particles were obtained from a radioactive material like radium or radon. And how was it placed? So if you want only alpha particles, you could have used radium or radon. But if you want fine pencil of it, you need to build a block around it. And the block is like some house. Okay, the house was built by this material with a lead. It was built with lead material because it was observed that alpha particles could not penetrate through lead. That is the reason why they use lead. If it comes as 1 mark question, you should be able to answer. Why is lead used? Why didn't they use some other material, glass or something? Alpha particles can easily pierce through the glass and come, but it could not pierce through lead. That is the reason why they use lead box. Now these two sentences make sense to you. Fine pencil and alpha particles is happening because of this lead box, and you are able to see a small opening here? And through the small opening, those pencil of alpha particles were released with a narrow opening, as shown in the figure below. That is the first point. But what was the main material onto which these alpha particles were projected? The thin gold foil that was used. So the gold foil is placed. Gold foil is placed over here. Right. Next. So the alpha particles are emitted from the source in all possible directions, but only narrow beam emerges from the lead box. Right. So the remaining alpha particles, what happened? They were obviously absorbed by the lead box itself. Right, so that there was no accident also taking place. That was like a protection mode also. Secondly, there were, after this pencil of alpha particles were coming out through the narrow opening, they were passed through two other small slits. Slit means opening. What were they? They are through small diaphragms D1 and D2. A narrow beam of alpha particles were incident on which material, guys? On the gold foil, right? So when it was incident on the gold foil, there were certain observations made. What was it? This is where the theory of Thomson's model failed. I'm assuming you have learned this in chemistry. That is why I'm going a little fast. Are you clear? Is there any doubt till this point? All right. Okay. So when these, it is just having a straight path that a greater velocity is going to make it a linear path. Okay. Now the gold foil is there. When it falls on this, what was observed? These alpha particles start. What is the name of the experiment? Alpha ray scattering experiment. So the alpha rays got scattered. After they fall on the gold foil, they started getting scattered, and those scattered alpha particles were captured on a screen called as. Any idea what the screen is? Zinc sulfide. So it was captured on a zinc sulfide screen, and that was later observed by a power microscope. They could observe small patches on top of it. Is the story clear? You understood what has happened? Right? What did they do? Simple. The diagram itself is explaining, right? So I hope the diagram is in your mind. Now can I explain the points? So after passing through the diaphragm D1 and D2, an narrow beam of alpha particles were incident on the thin gold foil and they started scattering through different angles. Thirdly, what happened? The scattered alpha particles strike a fluorescent screen coated with zinc sulfide. Okay. So when the alpha particles strike the screen, what happened? It was observed that there were tiny flashes that were existing, and those tiny flashes were observed under a low power microscope. Right? This is what the experimental output was. Okay. Based on this, they started framing, Rutherford started framing his theory of the structure of atom. So he told one point that atom is not completely positively charged for sure because of this kind of an observation. Right? So what were the observations? So it is something like this. So most of the alpha particles either passed straight through the gold foil or were scattered by small angles of the order of few degrees. This is the first observation. That is what they captured with the help of zinc sulfide screen. When can this thing happen? When can something like piercing through an atom and go take place? Only when that spot is empty. But what does Thomson say? He told the whole space is made up of positive. Whole sphere is made of positive charge. Alpha particles are positively charged. According to electrostatics, what should have happened? These alpha particles would have not even gone closer to this part. They should have not gone closer, right? They should have just returned back to the same path in which they traveled. Had it been completely positive charge, but what has happened? It was observed due to these kind of points taking place. It was observed that most of the atom is empty. Right. So this observation led to the conclusion that an atom has a lot of empty space as shown in the figure. that clear? Next. But few alpha particles, what did they do? Were scattered in the backward direction. What do you mean by backward direction? They took an exact turn of 180 degrees and they started traveling back in the same direction. If that was the case, then what can you conclude? At whichever spot this is taking place, can you conclude that at whichever area that is taking place, positive charge is approaching another positive charge? Right. So what did we say? So in Thomson's model, we told that it is concentrated throughout the sphere, but Rutherford's experiment concluded that it was concentrated only at a certain point. And that point was what is called as nucleus. Till then, there was no new name called as nucleus. So nucleus was first coined by Rutherford. Okay. So in the backward direction, which led Rutherford to conclude that the whole of the positive charge was concentrated in a tiny space of how much area? Sorry, how much radius? 10 power minus 14 meter, which is almost 1 femtometer. Femto is 10 power minus 15. This almost, that is very good. And this region was given a name called as nucleus. So have this in your mind. Okay. So only a small number of particles approach the nucleus of the atom and they were deflected at large angles. So what happened? If the nucleus was like this, the alpha particle which came exactly to the center of the nucleus took a 180-degree turn and went off. Whereas some alpha particles which came slightly close to the nucleus, due to the positive repulsion, what would have happened? They started deflecting at larger angles. That is what they're trying to say. Is that clear? So this is the theoretical observation. So Thomson's model also failed because it couldn't explain why this was happening. So is atoms ruled out? No. From this 180-degree term, what we can conclude is there is an important term that came into existence, which is called as the distance of closest approach. Name is suggesting something. What is it? So what is distance of closest approach? Who is approaching to the closest distance possible? Who is approaching the first place? Alpha. So they are approaching a certain distance and they are able to come to the closest possible distance before they take 180 degrees turn. Okay. So the question is, if I call this as the nucleus, the alpha particles are coming like this. The rays are coming in this way, right? So when they come, tell me one thing, are these alpha rays going to hit the nucleus and then take a turn, or they will go till the certain distance and then take a turn? They'll go till a certain distance, they'll take certain distance and then take a turn, because as it start approaching closer, repulsion will start increasing. So it can't approach. So when that is going to happen, let's say this is the distance that is going to exist between the closest point to which it is able to approach and closest point and so what is R naught as the distance between these 2 points. Are you able to understand? So technically the distance is what we call it as distance of closest approach. Okay, this is a mathematical expression, so I want everybody to write it down. It's a 2-step derivation. Okay. So an alpha particle directed toward the center of the nucleus will move close up to a distance R naught as shown in the figure, where what is going to happen? So something, I will draw the diagram. Okay. So this is what is going to happen. So tell me what energy conversions are taking place. What energy conversions are taking place? When the alpha particle is traveling, what is the energy it has? Kinetic energy. The kinetic energy, as soon as it comes to the momentary rest at this point, it will get converted to which form? What potential? It gets converted to electrostatic potential. That's what they are saying. Where its kinetic energy will appear as electrostatic potential energy. So after this point, the alpha particle begins to retrace its path. The distance R naught is known as the distance of the closest approach. It's very simple. Now let's say M and V are the mass and velocity of alpha particle directed towards the center of the nucleus. Then what is going to be its kinetic energy? half mv square, and this is getting converted to what? Electrostatic potential energy. What is the formula? mgh is gravitational potential energy. Half a, there is nothing like half. I have learned in the second chapter. K q1 q to something. K q1 q to by r. K q1 q2 divided by r. Correct now? So this will get converted to 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon naught into what is the value of q1? So what are the two particles that are present? One is alpha particle. Second is the nucleus. So what is the charge of an alpha particle? 2e into what is the charge of the nucleus? E is the charge of an electron. Inside the nucleus, who's responsible for charge? Protons, right? So protons have the same charge as that of an electron. So if E is the charge of one proton, how many protons will be present inside the nucleus? The atomic number times, right? So whatever is the atomic number, if I take an element X, A, Z, Z stands for the atomic number, which is the number of protons, and A stands for the number of mass number, which is the number of nucleons. That is protons plus the neutrons put together is what we call it as nucleon. That is a mass number. Right? We'll see it in the next chapter. But the charge of the nucleus is going to be what? Atomic number times the charge of each electron, which is going to be Z into E. Correct? Divided by what is the distance between them? R. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes time. Calculate the value of R naught in terms of all other parameters. Okay. Again. Before 4K or 4 pi? 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught is scale. Yeah? Oh, you're leaving this side. Okay. 4K. Okay. So this is the thing, right? Half mv square. You're able to see that? 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught into 2e into ze divided by r naught. Okay. This is a technical issue that you have faced. That's why I asked you the question. So R naught will be equal to, let me cancel this 2 times. This and this will get cancelled 2 times. So Z E square divided by pi epsilon naught mv square. Something like this. Right? Or how did you leave? Or you can write it as R naught is equal to 4K Z E square divided by mv square. This is also right. Or right. So this is one of the derivations in this chapter. Right, I hope it is clear. Right. So I hope you remember the story of what happened between Thomson and Rutherford. But the next question is it an accepted model today? It is an accepted model. It is not. Why? Because I told you one point, right? Whenever, let's say you also do some discovery, right? The first thing you need to do is you need to account for the stability of that atom. So when can you say some atom is stable? When it has equal number of positive and the negative. Let's not discuss about protons. Equal number of positive and negative charges. Right? But here he termed a point called as he termed a term called as nucleus. So that is where the positive charge being concentrated in the center comes into picture. What did Thomson say? Thomson told one important point. What is it? He told total positive charge and equal number of negative charge which are distributed symmetrically with respect to center. But he drove the whole theory and told it is still going to be a spherical shape, but I'm not going to accept that it is made of completely positive charge. Rather, positive charge is concentrated in a certain area. Right? So if it is having a positive charge, then where are the electrons present? So the electrons are supposed to be present around the nucleus somewhere. So listen to my statement carefully. What did I say? It should be present around the nucleus somewhere. It can be present anywhere. That is what he is trying to say. But what is he saying? My atom is still going to be stable if I am able to say that equal number of positive and negative charges are there. But that theory failed. Let's see why it is. So based on the results of the alpha ray scattering experiment, Rutherford suggested the following picture of atom. Atom may be regarded as a sphere of diameter, how much value? 10 power minus 10 meter, but whole of the positive charge and almost the entire mass of the atom is said to be concentrated at its center in a place called as a nucleus. Right? So concentrated central core called nucleus having a diameter of how much value? 10 power minus 14. The size of the nucleus is 10 power minus 14. Right? And what will happen? The electrons in the atom were considered to be distributed around the nucleus in where? In the empty space of the atom. Right? That's what he's saying, the empty space of the atom. If the electrons were at rest. So if he's saying nucleus is there, okay. And what is there around the nucleus? There are electrons. Where are they? In the empty space. But now the question is, are those electrons at rest or are they moving? Those electrons, are they at rest or are they moving? They are moving. Or else what would have happened? They would have got pulled into the nucleus. And what will happen? The nucleus as such will be completely neutral. But the experiment is saying that nucleus is having only positive charge. So in order to support this theory, see, nobody has seen, honestly speaking, nobody has seen how an atom is going to look like. But all these things are from the experiments and the theory they have proposed. We are just following it. Okay. So if the electrons were at rest, they would have got attracted and neutralized the nucleus. So to overcome this drawback, it's not a drawback, to overcome this challenge of proposal, what he did, what he told, Rutherford suggested that electrons, instead of being stationary, they are revolving around the nucleus, where in some empty space available. And when they are revolving, they are going to revolve in some circular orbits, is what they told. He didn't say elliptical orbit or something. He told it is going to revolve in circular orbit, so that there was sufficient. So whenever any object is in circular motion, what is the necessary force for it? Centripetal force. So he told that the centripetal force was holding the electrons to be in these kind of motion. Okay. So that the centripetal force is provided by the electrostatic force of attraction between the electron and the nucleus. I hope I'm clear with this point. Right. Secondly, an atom, he told, is electrically neutral, where the total positive charge of the nucleus is obviously equal to the total negative charge of the electrons that are present in it. Okay. So these were the two theories that he proposed for the structure of atom. But what were the drawbacks that came into the picture again? So Rutherford's atom model offered serious difficulties as regards to the stability of atom. So what was it? So he gave a theory saying that it is stable because the electrons are revolving and all those things. But what was the drawback that was observed practically? The electron in the circular orbit experiences a centripetal acceleration. And we know that when there is an accelerated charge particle, what should happen? According to the electromagnetic theory, there should have been. So you're saying centripetal force is keeping the electrons at rest. Force is there, force is non-zero, acceleration is non-zero. Accepted? Because F is equal to ma. So force is non-zero, acceleration is not zero. So when the charged particle, that is the electrons, have acceleration, what should have happened according to electromagnetic theory? Accelerating charged particles produce electromagnetic waves. And these electromagnetic waves, if they are released, what will happen? So if it is releasing something, if it is releasing an energy, then it obviously means it is losing some energy, right? So the electron starts losing some energy and must radiate energy in the form of electromagnetic waves. If it is losing energy continuously, what will happen to it? It will no more be in a circular path, rather it would have been in a spiral path. So here it is support. So the electron, therefore, the accelerated electron loses energy by radiation. The energy of the electron will continuously decrease. If it is decreasing, it could have not been in that particular circular orbit. Rather, it would have started moving in a spiral path, and after it moves in a spiral path, what will happen? It will collapse into the nucleus itself. If that happens, again the atom will become. And the whole experiment is failed, right? The nucleus becomes neutralized. If it is neutralized, then there is no concept of nucleus at all. So this is the first drawback. So, but it is well known, right? We know today that most of the atoms are stable. But his theory, according to his theory and the physics concepts that we know, it should have not been stable. Right. Secondly, according to the classical electromagnetic theory, what should have happened? The electron must radiate energy at a frequency proportional to the angular velocity of the electron. So omega is directly proportional to that is what they are saying. Therefore, as the electron spiral towards the nucleus, when the electron is spiraling towards the nucleus, what will happen is the radius will keep decreasing. So when the radius keeps decreasing, what will happen? The angular velocity becomes infinity, and when the angular velocity becomes infinity, the frequency also becomes infinity, and the energy radiated will also tend to infinity. Okay, so then what would have happened? If these kind of theories were followed, then there should have been a continuous emission of spectrum with all possible wavelengths. Okay. Have this point in your mind, you will understand this point better after you read the Bohr's theory. Okay, but experiment, what do they say? There is only one line spectrum of fixed wavelength from atom. That is what was observed from hydrogen atoms. Okay. Am I clear till this point, guys? Yes or no? So 60% of the chapter is over. Small chapter. You go have 5 minutes break and come. So next we'll see the Bohr's model of atom. Right. So what was the last drawback that we saw? According to Rutherford's model, what was it? Now try to understand this point. So whole electromagnetic theory says only one point. What is it? An accelerating charged particle must radiate energy, and that energy will have some frequency, and the frequency should be associated with what? With the frequency of it is associated with the angular velocity of the electron. So what was the first point telling us? If the electron was revolving in circular orbit, it would have lost energy and it would have taken a spiral path and fallen into the nucleus itself. Right? So second point, if you link the first point to the second point, what is it telling? If the electron takes a spiral path towards the nucleus, the angular velocity will tend to become what? Because V is equal to R omega. Logically, V is equal to R omega. Omega is equal to V divided by R. So radius of the circular orbit decreases and it becomes zero when it falls to the nucleus. As a result of which, angular velocity will become infinity. So if angular velocity is infinity, what does it mean? There should have been continuous emission of spectrum. But again, they're sticking to the same logic. What is happening? There are only 5 spectral lines that are possible. Whereas in this case, what has happened? There should have been a continuous spectrum with all possible wavelengths that should have got emitted. But experiments show only line spectra of fixed wavelength from the atoms. This is the possibility. Right. So this is the point that was taken into consideration, and there were some minor corrections made. By whom? So Bohr did not deny the fact that the atom was empty. He never denied the fact of the nucleus. But he was contradicting on only one factor, stating that the electrons cannot revolve around the nucleus in any empty space that is possible. Rather, they should revolve in some orbits where there are some quantization conditions that are satisfied. Okay, this is where the mathematical equations will again start coming to picture. Let's try to understand what he had to say. So Niels Bohr in 1930 modified Rutherford's. So he modified, he didn't contradict anything. So he modified the Rutherford's atom model in order to explain the stability of the atoms and emission of charged spectral lines. So we told about the discrete spectral lines, right? So he gave a better explanation to it. So for that, he proposed the following postulates. These were the theories that were proposed by him. What is it? An electron cannot revolve around the nucleus in all possible orbits. Rather, it will revolve only in those orbits where what is happening? Where the angular momentum is quantized. Okay, this is called as the post-quantization condition. Okay, so an electron cannot revolve around the nucleus in all possible orbits. Cannot revolve in all possible orbits. These electrons will revolve for sure, but in what? Only in those allowed or permissible orbits for which the angular momentum of the electron is what? Is an integral multiple of a quantity called as h divided by 2 pi, where h stands for what? Planck's constant, and its value is 6.626 into 10 power minus 34 joule per second. Sorry, joule second, not joule per second, joule second. Okay, and the name was given to it. What was the name of these orbits in which the angular momentum is quantized called as? That is what he called it as stationary orbits. Okay, so these orbits are called stationary orbits, or the more technical word is non-graduating orbits. Okay, and what will happen if an electron is revolving in that particular orbit? What was the contradiction in Bohr's theory? If an electron is revolving in a circular orbit, it will have acceleration. If acceleration is there, it should radiate energy. If it radiates energy, it will fall in a spiral path. But here, he is still saying it is in a circular orbit. But what is the extra point he is trying to add? If the electron is revolving in those orbits where this mathematical condition is satisfied, at that point, you can say that the electrons will not radiate any energy. So that is why they are called as stationary orbits. Okay. So mathematically, let's see what it means. You know what is angular momentum, right? We have seen it in, we saw this in magnetization also. Magnetism chapter, fifth chapter, I explained about the magnetic dipole moment. There is something called as Bohr's quantization condition that we use in Bohr magneton. Remember Bohr magneton? 9.27 into 10 power minus something. Minus 24 it comes, right? It comes from here. That's why we call it as Bohr magneton. Okay. If m and v are the mass and velocity of the electron in the permitted orbits of radius r, then what is going to be the angular momentum? Mathematically, angular momentum is m into v into r. Okay, the mathematical formula actually for angular momentum is r vector cross p vector. Okay, that when you solve it, it becomes mvr sine theta, but here theta will be 90 degrees, so it is mvr. So the orbit is going to be like this, nucleus is going to be like this. From the center to the orbit, if you call the radius to be r, and the velocity will be tangential. So mass into velocity multiplied with r, the perpendicular distance, is what is going to give you angular momentum. MVR should be equal to n into h divided by 2 pi. What does it n stand for? Principal quantum number, and it has only integral values because that represents the orbit number. 1, 2, 3, something like that. And what is the name of this condition? Bohr's quantization condition. What is Bohr's quantization condition? To put it in simple, it is m into v into r is equal to n into h divided by 2 pi. This is the condition. Okay. Next time we could be able to answer. Second, so first point we spoke about the angular momentum. Second is the question: when can the concept of spectral lines come into picture? Only when energy is radiated. But he is trying to say energy will get radiated only if an electron jumps from a higher orbit to a lower orbit. So those orbits have certain value of energy associated with them. Okay, that we will derive it mathematically. So an atom radiates energy only when an electron jumps from a stationary orbit of higher energy to a stationary orbit of lower energy. Okay, if the electron jumps from an orbit of energy E2 to an orbit of energy E1, then E2 minus E1 is the one which is accountable for the radiation that is coming out. So E2 minus E1 is what? Is equal to the energy of the radiation. Generally, energy of the radiation is measured in terms of h nu. You know this? Where h is a Planck's constant and u stands for the frequency of the radiation. So h nu. So E2 minus E1 is equal to h nu, which is also some condition of Bohr, but what is it called as? Frequency condition. Right? Simple, right? Things are simple. So he proposed two theory. One is Bohr's quantization condition and Bohr's frequency condition. As simple as that. These are the two mathematical equations that he proposed. And he also accounted for one important thing. Though the electron is in circular orbit, there are certain orbits in which it can revolve where it does not radiate energy. Those orbits are called stationary or non-graduating orbits. Okay. Now I told you, right? You will have some mathematical equations to be derived for the radius of a particular orbit and energy of an electron in a particular orbit. As I told you, the derivation is very, very simple. Let us see what are the considerations that you take into picture. Suppose you consider an atom whose nucleus has a positive charge Zt. I hope you understood why it is Zt. That is the number of protons, that is the atomic number of the particles present, or atomic number of that particular atom. That is the atomic number that gives the number of protons in the nucleus, and E stands for the charge of electron, which is numerically equal to that of the charge of the proton. So let an electron revolve around the nucleus in the nth orbit of radius Rn. Okay, so I'm taking it only till here. I'm taking the condition only till here. Now we will try to derive it. You guys tell me. Circular orbit. This is Ze. One electron is revolving in which orbit? In the nth orbit, and let the radius be Rn. So what is the force that is holding these two charges together? Electrostatic force. Then according to Coulomb's law, what should have happened? K Ze into E divided by Rn square is the Coulomb's law. Right? This force, this electrostatic force, is the one which is responsible for the centripetal force. That is mv square by r. So because this particle has a velocity also. Vn I wrote it because velocity of the particle in the nth orbit. Okay, it is Vn. Am I clear to this point? And this should be Rn. Rn and Rn will get cancelled. Now it is very simple. See, Rn is equal to kz E square divided by m into V square. This should have been the simplest formula that is possible, but this will not be the formula. Because whenever you derive a formula, right, which is the main reason is when you derive a mathematical equation, it should be helpful in the lab also. Right. For example, let's say I give you an atom and ask you to measure. Let's say there are certain devices that are used to measure. You do some experimental value, but at the same time, you should be able to apply it in the theoretical part and verify whether both are right. Only then, whatever you are studying is right. So in that case, what is the ready-made information that you already have? A. Is it an already available information? Yeah, they told us 9 into 10 power 9. Z. You can get it from the periodic table. E is already known. Divided by mass. Mass is what? Mass of whom? Mass of the electron. Because we have taken the mass of m into ds square divided by mass of the electron. I'll make this more specific. Mass of the electron into. So this is also known parameter. Then what is not known? What is difficult for you to calculate? Is it possible for you to practically calculate velocity inside? When you can't see something, how will you be able to calculate? So it is our job to ensure that this velocity is eliminated and written in terms of known parameters. For that, what we will do is, I'll call this as equation number 1. Now, what is the expression you can think of which gives you the relation between velocity and distance? You already did this in today's class. You already did. Okay, you can think of angular momentum also. So you can say angular momentum is quantized. Right? If that is the case, mvn into rn is equal to what? N nh by 2 pi. So what can I write vn as? nh by 2 pi into m into rn. If I call this as 2, can I take this 2 and substitute it in 1? Mass of electron. So nowhere proton will come into picture, except for the atomic number. So if I take 2 and substitute it in 1, then what will I get? Rn is equal to kz E square divided by m into, or mass of the electron, into Vn square. That is n square h square divided by 4 pi square m E square Rn square. Does that make sense? Am I clear? Did you understand what I did? H square divided by 4 pi square m E square into Rn square. What will go to the numerator? 4 pi square m E square Rn square will go, which implies Rn is equal to 4 pi square m E square Rn square into kz E square, the whole divided by m E square n square into h square. So what will get cancelled? One Rn will get cancelled on either side. So what will happen to that Rn? So I will leave the Rn on the left hand side and take everything to the right hand side. It will become me square. So when you're writing me, right, be careful. Write it as a suffix, or else you'll think it is a charge of an electron. Me square n square h square divided by 4 pi square me square kz e square. So what will get cancelled? I think there is something missing in it. It is empty. So it becomes m square divided by m. Correct? This and this will get cancelled. Right, k I will try to write it as 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. So me n square h square divided by 4 pi square into 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon naught. 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon naught into z e square. So 4 pi we get cancelled like this. N square into h square m e square epsilon naught the whole divided by pi z e square. Can you write it like this? This is not the value of Rn. So what I did, I took this h square outside into h square into me square is not there, it is me. H square into me into the epsilon in the denominator, epsilon naught in the denominator, we go to the numerator. Right? Now what do we do with the denominator? This 4 pi, 1 by is getting cancelled, right? I hope you're able to see that there it is not clear. This is cancelled. Right? So pi z e square. Any doubt in this? Right. Now what we can do is from this what is the expression we have? So can I write Rn is equal to, tell me. What's stuck? So now is it fine? Rn is equal to n square h square into me into epsilon naught divided by pi z e square. So I am writing the values known to us as one expression. See, me h square epsilon naught divided by pi e square into n square divided by z. Can I write it like this? Me h square epsilon naught divided by pi into e square into n square divided by z. So if you substitute all these values, right? If you substitute all these values where me is equal to 9.1 into 10 power minus 31 kilogram, h is equal to 6.626 into 10 power minus 34 joule second, epsilon naught is how much? 8.85 into 10 power minus 12. What is it? Kilogram square, not kilogram square. Coulomb square by Newton meter square. So pi is 3.14 and charge of the electron is 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 coulomb. If you take all these values and substitute it here and solve, you will get Rn is equal to 0.53 into n square divided by z angstrom. Have you seen this expression? Not seen. Yes, they'll ask you to calculate the radius of the electron in the nth orbit, radius of the nth orbit. So 0.53 n square divided by z times, so n square divided by z angstrom. So this is going to be the radius of the electron in the nth orbit, whose atomic number is also going to be 1. So if suppose I substitute n is equal to 1 and z is equal to 1, what atom does it come to? This is hydrogen atom, right? So when you take this and substitute it here, what will you get? You will get radius of the first orbit is 0.53 angstrom. This is also called as Bohr's radius. 0.53 angstrom. This is also called as Bohr's radius. Am I clear, guys? So this is how you calculate energy. 80% of the chapter is over. One more derivation. Okay. One more derivation, and then we have to see certain conclusions. After that, we'll see the drawbacks of this chapter. Then we can see nucleus. Nucleus is even more small, but they have deleted a lot of portions from it. Okay, so we can complete it maximum by tomorrow, I'm expecting. But let's see. Okay. Any other doubt, guys? So this is how you calculate the radius. Don't worry about the notes and all other things. This will be shared after the class. But as I told you, whatever important points I'm underlining, please ensure that it is written. Okay, so that it goes in your mind. Everything is clear? Okay. So that will be the end of today's session.